He was just a quiet man passing through a snow-covered town. No badge, no uniform, no reason to stand out. Beside him walked an old German shepherd, slower now, grayer around the muzzle, loyal in a way only time can teach. No one in that diner knew who he really was. They saw silence and mistook it for weakness. They didn't know he had once sworn an oath in the dark, or that some heroes don't raise their fists. They wait for the truth to speak. May God bless those who choose courage over fear, and may this story remind us that miracles still walk among us. Snow fell thick and relentless along the highway, swallowing sound and distance alike. The diner's windows glowed faintly against the white, a fragile pocket of warmth resisting the cold that pressed in from all sides. Daniel Brooks parked his truck beside the curb and sat still for a moment, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. The engine ticked as it cooled. He had learned not to rush transitions out of vehicles, out of rooms, out of moments. Rushing made noise. Noise invited attention. At 42, Daniel looked younger than his years at first glance, but the illusion didn't last long. He was tall, broad-shouldered, without bulk, his frame lean and economical, shaped by discipline rather than vanity. His dark hair was cut short in the practical style of someone who never quite stopped living out of a duffel bag. A trimmed beard lined his jaw, hiding a faint scar that curved toward his ear, an old souvenir from a life he no longer spoke about. He opened the door and stepped into the cold. Coda followed. The German shepherd moved slowly now, his age visible in the stiffness of his back legs and the careful way he placed his paws on icy ground. At nearly 10, Coda was past the sharp edge of his prime, but nothing about him suggested weakness. His black and tan coat was thick and weathered, the fur along his muzzle dusted with gray. One ear bore a small notch, healed poorly years ago, giving him a perpetually alert, uneven look. His eyes were steady, intelligent, always reading the space before Daniel did. Inside the diner, warmth wrapped around them in a rush of stale coffee, grease, and something faintly sweet. The place was small 4 booths, a counter worn smooth by decades of elbows, and a flickering neon sign buzzing softly near the window. Only a few locals occupied the room, shoulders hunched, faces half hidden behind mugs. No one looked up for long. Daniel chose the corner booth by habit, back to the wall, sightline clear. Coda slid beneath the table and lay down, chin resting on his paws, body angled toward the entrance. To anyone not paying attention, the dog was invisible. To Daniel, that was the point. The waitress approached after a moment. Her name tag read, Sarah. She looked to be in her early 30s, tall and slender, with auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail that slipped free at the temples. Her skin was pale, freckled lightly across the nose, the kind that burned easily in summer and flushed quickly in winter. There was a tired kindness in her eyes, the look of someone who had learned to be gentle without expecting much in return. "What can I get you?" she asked, voice soft but practiced. Daniel ordered the cheapest breakfast on the menu. He always did. Eggs, toast, whatever meat was listed without description. Sarah nodded and moved away without comment. She didn't ask questions. He noticed that. When the plate arrived, Daniel ate slowly, deliberately. He cut the meat in half and slid one portion beneath the table. Coda accepted it without lifting his head, tail, giving a single restrained thump against the floor. Years ago, Coda had been trained for noise and chaos. Now, like Daniel, he was trained for restraint. Daniel's thoughts drifted as he chewed. He didn't encourage that, but he didn't fight it either. Some memories surfaced, whether invited or not. The long nights overseas, the weight of responsibility that never fully left his shoulders, the moment he'd realized silence could be louder than shouting and far more dangerous. He finished his meal, wiped his hands carefully, and stood. At the counter, he placed his money down, adding a little extra before Sarah could object. "For the coffee," he said quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," she replied, meeting his eyes for a brief second longer than necessary. There was gratitude there, and something else, curiosity, perhaps, or recognition of another person passing through. Daniel turned toward the door. Coda rose smoothly and followed. The bell above the entrance rang. The sound was sharper than it should have been. Cold air rushed in as the door opened, carrying snow and the unmistakable weight of authority. A man stepped inside, heavy boots tracking slush across the linoleum. He wore a sheriff's uniform. Wade Turner filled the doorway as if it belonged to him. He was in his late 40s, thick through the chest and waist. His posture relaxed in a way that suggested he had never needed to move quickly. His face was broad and ruddy, the skin weathered by years of exposure and unchecked confidence. A coarse beard shadow clung unevenly to his jaw, more neglect than style, and his thinning hair was slicked back with deliberate care. The badge on his chest caught the light. Turner didn't greet anyone. He didn't have to. The room adjusted around him without instruction. Conversations died, shoulders stiffened, eyes dropped back to plates and cups. Power, Daniel knew, often announced itself through absence rather than force. Turner's gaze swept the diner lazily, cataloging faces he already knew. Then it stopped. On Daniel. The look lingered, not openly hostile, not yet, but curious in the way a man grows curious when something doesn't fit the order he's used to enforcing. His eyes flicked briefly to Coda, then back to Daniel's face, measuring. Daniel felt it immediately. He did not react. He stood where he was, posture neutral, hands relaxed at his sides. He had learned long ago that moments like this were thresholds. Once crossed, they could not be uncrossed. The bell above the door settled into silence, but Turner's eyes remained fixed on Daniel, holding him there a second longer than necessary. Wade Turner did not announce himself. He let the door close behind him and stood there, allowing the diner to register his presence the way animals sensed a shift in pressure. He was a large man, built thick through the chest and middle. His weight settled into the floor as if he belonged there more than the furniture did. His uniform was clean, but worn in the way of something used often and without question. He scanned the room slowly. Turner had learned, over years of wearing the badge, that people revealed themselves in the first second of eye contact, or the lack of it. The locals reacted as expected. Heads dipped, shoulders rounded, conversations evaporated. The yellow light above the counter seemed to dim, not in brightness, but in intention. Then his gaze stopped. Daniel Brooks stood near the door, water-darkened snow melting off his jacket. He did not rush to leave. He did not freeze. He simply stood there, posture neutral, hands loose at his sides. The kind of stillness that came not from fear, but from control. Turner frowned slightly. He stepped forward. "Morning," Turner said, voice easy, almost friendly. No one replied. Turner smiled at that, not warmly, but with the mild satisfaction of a man accustomed to silence obeying him. He took another step, boots heavy against the linoleum, eyes never leaving Daniel. "You passing through?" Turner asked. Daniel met his gaze. Yes, sir. Short, polite, complete. Turner waited for more. An explanation. A nervous laugh. Something to justify the interruption. When none came, the smile on his face thinned. You don't look like most folks who pass through, Turner said. Daniel did not rise to the bait. I just needed a meal. Turner tilted his head, studying him openly now. The haircut, the stance, the way Daniel's weight was evenly balanced, not favoring one leg like most men his age. Turner had been sheriff long enough to recognize patterns, even if he didn't understand them. Under the table, Coda shifted slightly. The German shepherd remained lying down, but his body was no longer relaxed. His back legs tucked beneath him, muscles engaged. One ear lifted, the other angled back, tracking Turner's movement with precision. His eyes were fixed, not aggressive, but alert. Turner noticed. That your dog? He asked. Yes, sir. Big animal to bring into a public place. It's cold outside. Turner glanced toward the windows, where snow pressed against the glass in thick sheets. He scoffed lightly. Rules are rules, he said, though no such rule was posted. Behind the counter, Frank Miller kept his head down. The old man's hands moved slowly as he wiped an already clean surface, knuckles pale with pressure. Frank had owned the diner long enough to know when attention became dangerous. His spine curved forward, not just from age, but from habit years of making himself smaller in the presence of men like Turner. Sarah stood near the coffee machine, her slender frame rigid. Up close, the freckles across her nose stood out against skin gone pale from winter and stress. She was tall, almost willowy, with auburn hair pulled back tight, though loose strands framed her face. Her eyes flicked between Turner and Daniel, worry etched clearly despite her attempt at neutrality. Turner took another step closer. You got a name? He asked. Daniel hesitated just long enough for Turner to notice. Daniel. No last name? Daniel's expression didn't change. No, sir. That did it. Turner's jaw tightened. Not in anger, yet, but in irritation. The kind that came when authority failed to produce its usual results. You understand where you are, Turner said quietly. Yes, sir. And you understand who I am? Yes, sir. Turner leaned in slightly, invading Daniel's space just enough to test him. Daniel did not retreat. He did not advance either. He held his ground with the calm of someone who had learned long ago that yielding too quickly invited worse. The diner felt smaller now. The air thickened with something unspoken. Coda's breathing changed, slower, deeper. His tail was still, but his entire body was coiled, ready. He did not growl. He did not move. Discipline held. Turner glanced down briefly, noting the dog's restraint. His lips curved in a faint, humorless smile. Well, he said, straightening, you picked an interesting place to stop. He let the words hang there, heavy with implication. No one spoke. Frank's eyes remained fixed on the counter. Sarah's fingers tightened around the edge of the tray she held. A man in the far booth stared into his coffee as if it contained answers. Daniel stood quietly, water from the melting snow dripping onto the floor at his feet. Turner watched him for a long moment, long enough that it was no longer casual, but deliberate. The calm didn't unsettle Daniel. It unsettled Turner. Wade Turner stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could smell the sharp bitterness of old coffee on his breath. The sheriff's presence filled the narrow space between the booths, his shadow cutting across the yellow light like a claim. Turner smiled, but it was thin and humorless, the kind that never reached the eyes. Those eyes, gray, slightly bloodshot, framed by heavy lids, studied Daniel with open contempt now. This was no longer curiosity, it was assessment. "You know," Turner said slowly, "most people get nervous right about now." Daniel said nothing. That silence felt louder than any insult. Turner had built his authority on reactions, flinches, apologies, anger. Silence denied him all three. Turner's hand drifted to the counter. His fingers closed around a clear glass, half filled with water and melting ice. He lifted it, rolling it slightly, watching the cubes clink softly against the sides. The sound was small, almost insignificant, yet every person in the diner heard it. Behind the counter, Frank Miller froze. The old man's thin shoulders tightened beneath his faded shirt, his face draining of color. He had seen this look before. Not often, but often enough to know how it ended. Sarah stood near the coffee machine, tall and rigid, her auburn hair pulled back too tightly, as if she'd done it in a hurry that morning. Her freckles stood out sharply against skin gone pale with tension. Her lips parted as if she might speak, then closed again. Experience had taught her the cost of speaking at the wrong moment. Turner turned the glass in his hand. "This town," he said quietly, "runs on respect." The word landed heavy in the air, warped by the way he said it. Then, without raising his voice or shifting his stance, Turner flicked his wrist. Cold water exploded across Daniel's face. The shock was immediate, icy and sharp, soaking his beard, his collar, the front of his jacket in seconds. Droplets scattered across the floor, catching the light as they fell. The room inhaled as one. Daniel did not move. He did not wipe his face. He did not step back. Water ran down his cheeks and dripped from his chin, darkening the floor at his boots. His eyes remained locked on Turner's, steady and unblinking. Under the table, Coda surged to his feet. The German shepherd's growl was low and controlled, vibrating deep in his chest rather than spilling out. His hackles lifted along his spine, black and tan fur bristling as his muscles coiled. At nearly 10 years old, Coda no longer moved with the reckless speed of youth, but nothing about him suggested hesitation. Daniel's hand lifted slightly. "Down," he said. The word was soft but absolute. Coda obeyed instantly, lowering himself back to the floor, though every line of his body screamed readiness. His eyes never left Turner. Turner laughed. It was short and sharp, the sound of a man pleased with himself. "See that?" he said, glancing around the diner. "That's control." No one answered. Frank's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the counter. Sarah stared at the floor, her chest tight, heart pounding. A man in the far booth squeezed his coffee mug so hard his knuckles whitened, yet he did not look up. Turner set the empty glass down with a deliberate clink and leaned back slightly, admiring his work. The water soaking Daniel's jacket, the stunned silence, the obedience of the dog. It all reinforced the order he expected. Daniel finally moved. He lifted his chin a fraction, water dripping from his lashes. The movement was slow, deliberate, as if measured against something internal rather than the man in front of him. His face showed no anger, no embarrassment, only calm. That calm unsettled Turner. For the first time, Uncertainty flickered across the sheriff's expression. Not fear, but irritation sharpened by the sense that something had not gone as planned. Men were supposed to break, or beg, or explode. Daniel did none of those things. Turner's gaze flicked briefly upward toward the ceiling, then back to Daniel. He had not noticed the camera. Not really. The old dome casing above the corner booth blended easily into the background, dusty, slightly crooked, dismissed years ago as broken. But it wasn't broken. Inside its dull casing, a small red light blinked faintly, almost imperceptible. The lens remained fixed, capturing every second, the glass, the water, the stillness that followed. Turner straightened, adjusting his belt. "You should dry off," he said lightly. "Road's cold this time of year." Daniel did not reply. He stood there, soaked and silent, his presence suddenly heavier than before. Not because he had reacted, but because he hadn't. Turner held his gaze a moment longer, then turned away as if bored. He took a step toward the counter, toward Frank, toward his coffee. Behind him, snow continued to fall against the diner windows, thick and relentless, sealing the moment in ice. Daniel did not resist when Turner told him to step outside. There was no formal charge, no clear explanation, only a casual nod toward the door and a hand resting near a badge that didn't need to be touched to be understood. Daniel followed without argument. The cold hit him immediately, sharper than before, the water still clinging to his jacket turning icy against his skin. Coda was leashed to a metal post near the side of the diner. Snow had begun to thicken again, the flakes larger now, sticking to the dog's fur as they fell. Coda stood rather than lay down, his back straight despite the stiffness in his legs. His breath rose in steady white plumes. At 10 years old, the cold took more from him than it once had, but he did not whine. He did not pull. His eyes followed Daniel with the same focused loyalty they always had. Daniel stopped long enough to meet Coda's gaze. "Stay," he said quietly. Coda's ears flicked forward. He did not like the command, but he understood it. He sat, muscles tight beneath his thick coat, eyes never leaving Daniel as Turner guided him toward the cruiser. The back seat was hard plastic and smelled faintly of disinfectant and old fabric. Daniel sat upright, hands resting loosely on his knees, breath controlled. He counted it without thinking in for 4, out for 6, the same rhythm he'd used in places far colder and far more dangerous. Turner didn't speak during the drive. He didn't need to. The message was clear enough. Inside the diner, the door closed and the room exhaled all at once. Frank Miller's hands shook as he poured himself a cup of coffee he would not drink. The old man moved slowly, deliberately, as if sudden motion might draw attention even now. His face looked thinner than it had that morning, the lines around his mouth carved deeper by something heavier than age. Across the counter, Lily stood frozen. She was new, barely 22, tall and narrow-shouldered, with straight black hair cut just below her chin. Her skin was olive-toned, unmarked by freckles or lines, her youth visible in the way she held herself too carefully, as if trying not to take up space. She had started working at the diner 6 months ago, after dropping out of community college to help her mother pay rent. She had learned quickly when to smile and when to look down. Her eyes were wide now. Did he really?" she began, then stopped herself. Frank glanced toward the door, then back to Lily. He didn't answer immediately. He rarely did. "Yes," he said at last. "He did." Sarah leaned against the counter, her auburn hair escaping its tie, curls clinging to her temples. She looked pale, more tired than usual. She had seen Turner humiliate people before, men who talked back, women who complained, but something about this had felt different. "That man didn't do anything," she said softly. Frank nodded. "That's usually when it happens." Lily swallowed. "He does this a lot, doesn't he?" Frank didn't answer right away. He reached beneath the counter and pulled out a rag, wiping a spot that was already clean. His hands steadied only when he focused on the task. "More than folks admit," he said. Sarah glanced toward the ceiling, toward the corner above the booths. "The camera," she said. Lily followed her gaze. "I thought it was broken." "That's what we were told," Frank replied. Lily frowned. She hesitated, then moved toward the back office, her steps quiet but purposeful. She had been the one Frank trusted with small fixes, printer jams, frozen registers, things that required patience more than experience. The office was cramped and dim, the walls lined with old invoices and faded inspection certificates. A small monitor sat on a shelf above a dusty desktop computer. Lily wiped the screen with her sleeve and pressed the power button. The monitor flickered, then came to life. The feed appeared grainy but clear enough. The angle was wrong, too high, too far, but the shapes were unmistakable. Turner's bulk, Daniel's stillness, the arc of water. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. "It's not broken," she whispered. Frank stepped closer, his breath catching when he saw the image freeze on the screen. He reached out, then stopped himself, as if afraid touching it might erase what he was seeing. "I kept copies," he said quietly. Sarah turned to him. "You what?" "Years ago," Frank said. "After the first time he told me to delete something. I didn't trust him then. I trust him less now." He opened a drawer and pulled out a small, battered external drive. The plastic casing was scratched, the label faded. "This has everything," he said. "Dates, times, not just tonight." Lily looked from the screen to the drive, then back again. Fear and resolve warred in her expression. "What do we do?" Frank stared at the frozen image of Daniel standing soaked and silent. He thought of all the times he'd looked away, all the times he'd told himself it wasn't his place. "We remember," he said. "That's what we do." Outside, the snow continued to fall. Coda shifted his weight, paws aching against the frozen ground. He lowered himself into a sit, never breaking eye contact with the diner door. Somewhere beyond it, Daniel was being held for reasons no one would write down. The night stretched on, quiet and unforgiving. Daniel was released just after dawn. No paperwork was handed to him, no explanation offered. The deputy at the front desk avoided eye contact, sliding Daniel's personal items across the counter as if the wood itself might listen. The message was delivered without ceremony. "You're free to go," and with it, the unspoken addendum that carried more weight than any charge. "Don't stay." Daniel nodded once. He didn't ask questions. He never did when answers were designed to provoke rather than clarify. Outside, the cold was cleaner than the air inside the station. Snow lay undisturbed along the curb, pale and quiet, the kind of stillness that hid movement rather than denied it. His truck waited where he'd left it, a thin crust of frost along the windshield. Coda stood beside it, tethered to a post with a length of rope that someone had thoughtfully provided. The German shepherd's ears lifted the instant Daniel appeared. He rose slowly, carefully tail stiff with relief, and pressed his head against Daniel's thigh. Daniel knelt and rested his forehead briefly against Coda's. The dog's breath was warm, steady, alive. "I'm here," Daniel said softly. He untied the rope, helped Coda into the passenger seat, then sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. He stayed there longer than necessary, letting the quiet settle back into his bones. The impulse to leave immediately tugged at him, but experience had taught him that haste invited mistakes. A knock sounded against the driver's side window. Frank Miller stood there, shoulders hunched against the cold. In the gray light, he looked older than he had the night before, his thin frame swallowed by a worn coat. His white hair lay flat against his head, damp with snow. His eyes, though tired, were clear in a way Daniel hadn't seen earlier. Frank held up a small object. "Can we talk?" he asked. They moved to the side of the diner, sheltered from the wind. Frank reached into his coat and produced a slim memory stick, taped carefully to a folded sheet of paper. His hands shook only slightly as he passed it over. "This is everything I have," Frank said. "Video, dates, names." Daniel didn't take it right away. He studied Frank's face instead, the set of his jaw, the effort it took for him to stand there now. This wasn't bravery born of anger. It was something quieter, more dangerous. "Why give it to me?" Daniel asked. Frank swallowed. "Because you won't use it to hurt anyone." Daniel accepted the drive. The list Frank handed over was handwritten, neat and deliberate. Names of people who had passed through the diner over the years and left smaller than they'd arrived. A mechanic, a waitress who quit suddenly, a man who slept in his truck until Turner made it uncomfortable to stay. Daniel folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket. "I can't promise what happens next," he said. Frank nodded. "I'm not asking for promises." Inside the diner, Sarah and Lily watched from the window. Sarah's arms were crossed tightly, her posture rigid, her auburn hair tucked beneath a knit cap she hadn't bothered to remove. Lily stood beside her, dark eyes sharp despite the fatigue etched into her face. "He's really leaving," Lily murmured. "For now," Sarah replied. Daniel drove east until the town disappeared behind a bend in the highway. Only then did he pull into a rest area overlooking a frozen river. He shut off the engine and sat, the envelope heavy in his pocket. He made his first call from a payphone near the bathrooms. Short, careful. He didn't explain, he never did. He spoke in facts, not accusations. Names, dates, evidence. The second call went unanswered. The third did not. Daniel's voice remained steady throughout, measured and precise. He didn't mention Turner's badge. He didn't mention his own past. He let the information speak, trusting it to find the ears that knew how to listen. Coda waited in the truck, watching the world through the windshield. His muzzle rested against the glass, breath fogging a small circle he returned to again and again. Age had slowed him, but it hadn't dulled his awareness. He sensed the shift in Daniel, the same tension he'd felt before missions long ago. When Daniel returned, he scratched behind Coda's ears and started the engine. Back in town, the diner reopened that afternoon. Frank unlocked the door with hands that trembled less than he expected. He turned on the lights, wiped the counter, wrote the day's special on the board, as he always had. Routine steadied him. It always had. Sarah arrived 10 minutes later. She set her bag down, tied her apron, and met Frank's eyes. No words passed between them, but something had changed. A weight had shifted, not lifted exactly, but redistributed. Lily came in last, hair still damp from a hurried shower. She glanced at the ceiling instinctively, then at Frank. He nodded once. Turner did not come that day. Snow continued to fall, soft and unremarkable. The town went about its business as if nothing had happened. But beneath the surface, something had begun to move, not loudly, not quickly, just enough. The morning came in gray layers. Snow hung low over the town, not falling so much as lingering, pressed flat by a sky that refused to brighten. The diner's neon sign was still dark when the first unfamiliar vehicles arrived. Unmarked sedans and SUVs, clean lines, clean paint, none bearing the symbols the town recognized as its own. They parked without urgency. Doors opened. People stepped out who did not look around for permission. Wade Turner emerged from the diner with the same posture he always wore. Chin lifted, shoulders squared, annoyance already etched across his face. He was dressed for authority, uniform pressed, boots polished, beard trimmed just enough to suggest control without care. Years of being deferred to had shaped him into a man who mistook resistance for inconvenience rather than danger. He stopped when he saw them. There were 4 of them at first, 2 men, 2 women each moving with quiet confidence. They wore plain winter coats over tailored suits, badges tucked away rather than displayed. The lead investigator stepped forward, a tall man with salt and pepper hair cut close to the scalp and a narrow face marked by patience rather than warmth. His name was Thomas Reed, and he had the posture of someone who listened more than he spoke, the kind of man who let silence work on his behalf. "Sheriff Turner," Reed said. His voice was level, unhurried. Turner's jaw tightened. "This is county business," Reed nodded once. "It is." Behind him, Angela Morales stepped into view. She was shorter, compact, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. Her coat was open just enough to reveal a badge that carried weight beyond the town limits. She held a folder against her chest, fingers resting lightly along its edge, as if to remind herself that everything inside already existed. Inside the diner, Frank Miller stood at the counter, hands folded together. He had dressed carefully that morning, buttoning a clean shirt he saved for inspections and funerals. His shoulders still curved forward, but there was something steadier in the way he held himself now. Sarah stood near the coffee machine, tall and pale, auburn hair tucked beneath a knit cap. Her freckles stood out sharply against skin gone almost translucent with nerves. Lily hovered near the back, black hair framing her face, eyes fixed on the doorway. No one looked away. That was new, Turner noticed. "What's this about?" Turner asked, forcing a smile that didn't quite settle into place. Reed glanced at Morales. She opened the folder and began, not with accusations, not with tone, but with facts, dates, times, locations, the diner, the camera, the glass, the water, the overnight hold without cause. Each item landed softly. Together, they weighed a great deal. Turner's confidence shifted, cracking along familiar fault lines. He laughed once, sharp and dismissive. "You're taking the word of what diners and drifters now?" Morales looked up. "We're taking the evidence." Two uniformed officers stepped forward from behind the vehicles. They were not local. Their posture was precise, their expressions unreadable. One of them carried handcuffs. The metal caught the light. Turner's smile vanished. "This is ridiculous," he said, louder now. "I've kept this town safe for years." Frank felt the words settle into the room like dust. He thought of all the times safety had meant silence. He thought of the drive taped beneath his counter, of the red light blinking faintly in the corner of the ceiling. Reed nodded again. "You're being relieved of duty, effective immediately." Turner took a step back. The movement was small, instinctive. For the first time, he looked around, not to dominate, but to measure who might come to his defense. No one did. The cuffs closed around his wrists with a clean, final sound. Inside the diner, Lily exhaled shakily. Sarah's hands trembled, but she did not lower her gaze. Frank felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized he'd been holding for years. Turner was guided toward the vehicle, his protest trailing off as procedure replaced authority. The door closed. An engine started. The lights did not flash. They did not need to. By the time the vehicles pulled away, the town had already changed. Daniel Brooks was not there to see it. He was miles east by then, driving along a ribbon of highway bordered by frozen fields and bare trees. Snow lay in thin sheets across the shoulders, the road itself clear and quiet. Coda sat in the passenger seat, his broad chest rising and falling steadily, eyes tracking the world with calm vigilance. Daniel pulled over near a bend where the river widened, ice fractured along its surface like a map of old decisions. He shut off the engine and rested his hand on Coda's head, fingers sinking into the thick fur behind his ears. "Easy," he murmured. Coda leaned into the touch, content. Daniel did not feel victorious. He had learned long ago that victory was loud and fleeting. This was something else. A correction. A line redrawn. He sat there for a moment longer, then started the engine and merged back onto the road. The town receded behind him, smaller with every mile, not erased, but released. Snow continued to fall, indifferent and steady. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through restraint, through truth, through a person who refuses to become what darkness expects. Daniel didn't win because he was stronger. He didn't win because of his past, his training, or his silence. He won because he stood still when it would have been easier to strike back. And maybe that's how God works more often than we realize. Not by removing evil instantly, but by giving ordinary people the strength to stop pretending it isn't there. In our daily lives, we all face moments like this. Moments when staying silent feels safer. Moments when doing the right thing costs comfort, reputation, or peace. But Scripture reminds us that the truth sets us free. And freedom often begins the moment we choose courage over fear. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it, because someone else may need this reminder today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, or what part of the story stayed with you. And subscribe to the channel so more stories of quiet courage can be told. May God bless you, protect you, and walk with you, especially when the road feels long and the silence feels heavy.